Our speaker today is Hazan Weber. As you know, he joined Temple Beth Shalom last summer, and he's been very busy, both with the temple, the schools, and some outside activities. His interesting life starts in New Jersey, spans through several opera theaters, and then ultimately to JTS, where he became a cantor. And after he became a cantor, he spent some time in Poland with the Cantors Assembly. He'll tell us all about that. And then he also was with Agudas, Temple Israel.
Addis Israel.
Addis Israel in Washington, D.C. before he came to Sarasota. So I'm not going to spoil his thunder, because he'll tell you about his life much better than I can. So with that, I'd like to introduce Hazan Weber.
Thanks. Two. Feels strange to be in front of people not saying Shabbat Shalom, but hello. Yom Tov. No, it's not a holiday either. It's a little bit loud. Is it okay if I turn one of these off? That'll work, right? Okay. So I was a little surprised when I was asked to be part of this interesting Lives series, because it's just been my life. I don't know it was that interesting, but it seems to be interesting, so I'll happy to share it with you. It actually didn't start in New Jersey. That was where I was sort of when I decided to be a cantor, but I'm originally from, I was born in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, a place that hardly anybody has ever heard of. It's just outside of Philly. Okay, we got a few people there. In Valley Forge, at a hospital that does not exist anymore. And then when I was very small, my family moved back to New York, which is where they were from in the first place. My parents are from Brooklyn and the Bronx. Yay, New York. Yay, Brooklyn and Bronx. And my family's background actually is from Austria-Hungary, Germany, area which is now Poland or Lithuania, depending on which year you're talking about. And I did not actually grow up in a very observant home at all, which is kind of strange that I ended up being a cantor. It was certainly not one of the first things on my list that I thought that I would ever do. We were sort of the 3 times a year Jews. This was back in the 1970s, and I grew up in a family where they did have me go to Hebrew school a couple of times a week, and we went on the holidays. And my mother tells me that we went on Friday nights to services sometimes, but it obviously didn't make a big impact because I don't remember it. I do remember my mother did have something to do with the sisterhood at our shul. This was out on Long Island, at East Northport Jewish Center. I was eventually bar mitzvahed at the age of 13 when I was supposed to be, but getting there was a struggle because I was the kind of student, and I can sympathize now as a tutor for all of the B'nai Mitzvah. I really, really didn't enjoy religious school. I did whatever I could. I'd fake being sick. I did everything that I could to get out of going. Missed the carpool, stuff like that. And skipping a whole bunch of years, when I started to become a bar mitzvah tutor, what really stuck in my head was all of the things about the way that I was taught to study for my bar mitzvah, and I felt very strongly that was not how I was going to teach, because it was such a bad experience for me. So I've experimented as a cantor, since I've been a cantor in the past 7 years, with developing the program. So it's interesting for the kids, and they're actually doing things instead of just saying, go home and memorize this and listen to the tape and just do it that way, that's all. But I've skipped a whole bunch of years. Let's move back to Long Island back in the 70s. I do remember when I was the day of my bar mitzvah, that the cantor, when I finished the Haftarah, I don't think I even did a Torah reading. The cantor said something like, "I didn't realize we had a guest cantor here today." At that point, I didn't either. That was really kind of when I started singing. I was a professional singer before I was a cantor, and that was sort of, I guess, the first sign that singing was a good thing for me to be doing. I grew up in a household that my father is a real audiophile. That's, for those of you who don't know, that's his record collection was like his big thing, his classical music and opera and all of that. So I always heard opera in the house and serious music, as you may say, when I was growing up. And we went to the Metropolitan Opera and stuff like that when I was growing up. So I always had it sort of as part of my life. And also as part of, looking back, in retrospect, the connections to the synagogue actually were there and I didn't know. For those of you who have been here on Friday nights, you see that I use my guitar and I play the guitar in the services. My connection with the guitar actually ended up with Hebrew school, and I had totally forgotten about it until about 15 years ago, when one of the teachers said to my parents at a parent-teacher conference, you should really get your son a guitar. He really likes my guitar. He likes to play with my guitar. Again, I don't recall that happening either. But I'm glad that he did say that, because actually the guitar that I use on Friday night here, my 12-string guitar, I've actually had since 1978. So that was sort of a direct connection from back then to my current day use of it. As I said, this was the last thing that I ever thought I'd be doing. I had my guitar, I had my electric guitar, I played in bands, rock bands, did Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and all kinds of stuff. And wasn't always with the best crowd of people, but I never was too bad, never really got in trouble. But when I was in 9th grade is really when my music education, my voice education started. I had music background. My grandmother had gone out when I believe I was in 1st grade. My sister was in 3rd grade and bought us a piano, didn't tell anybody, and all of a sudden she calls and says, in about an hour there's going to be a delivery and there's your piano. So I learned to play the piano, and so we did have that background with music. But in 9th grade, just because I didn't feel like taking shop, I signed up for chorus, and that was the beginning. I ended up doing shows, as some of your children, grandchildren may be involved. The school musicals, some community things with theater. And my music teacher, my choir teacher, at that time, her name was Sharon Murray, and I have lost track of her, unfortunately. I've looked for her on Facebook and haven't found her yet. So if any of you come across her, let me know. She decided to, I had some solos in the choir, and she said, I have somebody I want to take you to, this teacher who's out in Port Jefferson on Long Island, which, as I said, that's where I lived. Just to give a listen and see what they think of you. I don't know if any of you are opera fans. This was her name was Eleanor Stieber. She was in her day. She was a very, very well-known opera singer. I went out there. I had prepared one Italian song from the 24 Italian Art Songs book by Schirmer. I think it was Caro Mio Ben, which is also usually one of the first songs that somebody learns. And I Got Plenty of Nuttin', which I had done in one of the school variety things. And I recall Miss Stieber saying to me at some point later on that if she had gone just by the Italian song, that it wasn't, she didn't really know, but the way that I put across the Porgy and Bess, she saw something there, and she took me as a student. I was 14 at the time. Actually, years later, they did an interview with her on the Sunday morning Charles Kuralt show, if you remember Charles Kuralt. And they did a whole story about her, and they came to Juilliard, which is where she taught, and I was a student of hers there later on. They were interviewing her, and she was talking about me, and they were interviewing me about her. And she actually sort of spilled the beans on national television and said, well, Jeff came to me and he was 14, but they lied and they said he was 16, so I would just listen to him. So there it is. I got caught in my first lie. I don't think that's happened ever again. But it was for a good reason, at least, right? I studied voice, I did shows, I got involved in a lot of community things. I had my band, I had hair down to probably about here at different times, different lengths. Played at school dances and stuff like that. And all the while, I was studying opera at the same time. You may wonder how the two can go together with rock music and opera. It's not easy because a lot of times you do sing with a different technique and you can really hurt your voice. So what I ended up doing was when it came to things like groups like The Who and where it came to scream, like where the screaming had to be done in the vocals, I would just tell the keyboard player to do it and I wasn't going to do that part. I went on to music school. I went to a few different music schools. And summer programs. The first, well, actually, before I go there, let me go back a little bit. In my senior year of high school, they started a new program. There had always been a Presidential Scholars Program, but it had never been open for the arts. And that year, they happened to have opened it up to the Presidential Scholars in the Arts. Now it's just called the Arts Program. And my high school chorus teacher, who I had done barbershop music with and shows and all kinds of stuff, said, this is a good thing. I think you should go to the studio, make a recording and send it into them, see how it goes. They liked it. They had me come out to Princeton and compete, and they didn't quite know what to do with me because they didn't expect for a high school singer to be involved in this, because usually a voice is not developed enough to really be involved in it at that point. They just figured they'd get instrumentalists. But I did place as a finalist in that, so that was one of my first trophies. And then I went on to music school. I went to State University of New York. It's in the SUNY system at Purchase, which is in Westchester. And the reason I ended up going there was their music program. They have a wonderful arts program there. The way that they chose music teachers was they didn't have teachers on staff there, on faculty. You could choose your voice teacher, and as long as they approved of who that person was, X dollars of your tuition would be paid toward that teacher. So that way I was able to go to college and keep studying with Miss Stieber. It was a schlep every Saturday morning. Again, I was not Shomer Shabbos or anything at that point. So Saturday mornings I would take a very early in the morning ride from Westchester all the way out to Port Jefferson on Long Island for my voice lesson. My parents liked it because they were living on Long Island and they got to see me on the weekend. I liked it also because Mom did my laundry and always sent me back home back up there with food. A nice Jewish boy, right? I studied at SUNY Purchase for a few years, and I didn't end up graduating from there. I went back to Long Island, and I went to community college for a year, where I studied languages and abnormal psychology, which I think really, in retrospect, that really helped me for this career. So I did that, and somewhere along that year, decided with my grandmother's coaxing that I should audition for Juilliard, and I didn't plan on going there, but she insisted that I audition, and I did. I got in, so I went. Why not? If you get in, how do you turn them down, right? So I did end up studying there, and got my music degree from Juilliard. While I was a music student is actually where I made the connection with Jewish music. I hadn't had anything really to do with it since my bar mitzvah. I sort of, as I said, I got through the bar mitzvah and I ran and never looked back. But while I was, there was one day I was in the opera office at Juilliard, and there was a job posting. They were looking for a Jewish tenor that could sight read music over at Park East Synagogue on the Upper East Side. They were putting together a male octet, and so I figured, I could use some money, so I went over there and I auditioned for them, and I ended up with them for about 18 years after that. So I was doing that while I was a student, and I also, I had a few things going for me. I was Jewish, so I could work in all of the Jewish venues, including the Orthodox. I was a guy, so again, I could work even in the Orthodox venues. I was a tenor, which is rare to find especially for choir music. You're always looking for tenors. And I could actually sight read music, which is even harder to find. So I sort of cornered the market in the New York tri-state area. And I got hired by a whole bunch of different synagogues, and anytime there was a concert, they would bring me in as a ringer with the choirs. In case you don't know, a ringer is a paid professional in volunteer groups, church, synagogue choirs, things like that, community choirs. And it was during my tenure at Park East Synagogue that I met cantor Moshe Geffen. And he had also been a Juilliard graduate. This is while I was still at Juilliard is when I met him. But he had grown up Orthodox. He didn't go to school to be a cantor. He just sort of learned it along the way, which is how everything used to be. They didn't have cantorial schools, and it was sort of everything was done as an apprenticeship, and that's how you learned your trade. And he was supposed to he had started an opera career. He was actually, if any of you are from New York, you may have heard of Amato Opera Company. It's Joe Amato. It's down in the Village. And Moshe Geffen had been the first Rodolfo in La Boheme that they had. And being Orthodox, he said, if you want me to do the show, you're going to have to hold the curtain because I'm not going on before Shabbos is out. And they did. So he spoke to me on several occasions and said, you should think about being a cantor. And I was like, well, I really couldn't do that. It's not, not my lifestyle. It's not, how I feel. And he said, well, Jeffrey, don't fool yourself. And he spoke kind of like this. He spoke, And he said, Jeffrey, don't fool yourself. It's a good job for a nice Jewish boy, and you can grow into it. And again, I'll preface this with, I did not always keep kosher. I did not always live an observant lifestyle. My response when he finally came to me and said, I got a phone call from him, and he said, I've started a scholarship fund over at Yeshiva, and I'd like to offer you the first scholarship. And my response again, I say would not have been my response today, was I like bacon cheeseburgers too much, I could never do that. Time changes you. It took me 18 years to get to the point in my life that it was the right thing for me, and I did believe things that made this a comfortable lifestyle for me. During that time, I sang at Oheb Shalom in South Orange, New Jersey, and there was a female cantor there, Erica Lippitz, and actually we have a gentleman that just moved into the neighborhood that I had met up in choral at the Jewish choral festivals up in the Catskills, and it's her cousin. So he's down in our community right now. It's kind of nice to have that connection. So I sang there. I sang at Park East Synagogue. I sang at Park Avenue Synagogue. I sang at a whole bunch of different places. This was all started while I was a student at Juilliard. There was also a Jewish chorale called the Rottenberg Chorale that was they worked out of Merkin Concert Hall, and I was a ringer with that group. They had me come in, and I'll never forget. There was one of the coaches at Juilliard had been over there, and Juilliard and Merkin Hall they're just a few blocks away from each other. And I was going over there for a rehearsal, and she was leaving a rehearsal. She was working at Lincoln Center. And she saw me and we were talking, and she goes, and she knew that I was an opera singer, I was studying opera. And I said, she said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I came over here to work with this Jewish music." And she was Jewish also. And she said, "What, are you going to be doing an opera by a man named Chuch?" She actually ended up being the assistant chorus master at the Metropolitan Opera very shortly after that. Which is one of the places that my wife and I both did sing, partially thanks to her, because she was one of the people on the committee that interviewed us and auditioned us. But again, I'm jumping a little bit, so I'm going to go back. I did all this Jewish music in the New York area, in Connecticut. There were Eli Schleifer from Israel came in, and the choir from the Great Synagogue would come in to do concerts, and they would find me, and I'd sort of be hired to sing with those groups. And it sort of was like the way it traditionally used to be, as I said, where people would study and they would learn their trade by being involved in it, not going to school for it. So I did put in my how do you say, put in your dues? No, that's paid my dues with that. In 1987, I was hired also by this same woman who I was talking about, who was the coach, ended up being the person at the Met. While I was a Juilliard student, I was auditioning for Lake George Opera, which is a summer festival up in New York, where I was fortunate enough to meet my wife, Andrea. We both were hired that summer, and this woman, her name was Susan Almasi, was on that interview committee, and I have her to thank for meeting my wife, who, if you don't know, my wife is also an opera singer. She's a mezzo-soprano, and she has her music degree from Manhattan School of Music. And we've had the pleasure of doing a lot of good music together in a lot of wonderful places, one of which being Sarasota. About 20 years ago, we were apprentices in the Sarasota Opera, and that's why I knew when I saw this position was available that this was a wonderful community to be part of. But again, I keep skipping forward and then going back. It's kind of like a TV show with the flashbacks. Finished at Juilliard, did a whole bunch of Jewish music in the New York area, got involved a lot in the Jewish choral scene with Mati Lazar, who is the head of Zamir Chorale in New York and the head of the North American Jewish Choral Festival. Was very involved in working with them for many years. And did a lot of operas around New York and in Brooklyn, in Central Park. Was involved in a lot of music festivals. At the Tanglewood Festival, I performed for a couple of summers, and my wife and I both spent 3 summers singing with the Aspen Festival in Colorado, which was a wonderful place to be. And she was in Chautauqua as well, upstate New York. We were fortunate enough to get all of this work together, which was great. And we both auditioned for New York City Opera. We decided that we weren't married yet, but we decided that if we kind of knew we were going to get married. That was our plan. Rather than have a solo career and keep pursuing all of that, we went into the choral stuff, which I had a big, background in already. So we auditioned for the New York City Opera they had regular chorus at that time, which was a full-time position with benefits and everything, which is a rare thing in music as a singer. Andrea got in 1 year, and I got in the following year, and we were fortunate enough to spend a few years together performing with New York City Opera, and also with the Metropolitan Opera, because while we were there, we figured it's right next door. We went for auditions over there to do chorus jobs with them too. And as I was starting to say before, it was kind of, you can imagine how nervous you'd get to go and audition for the Metropolitan Opera, right? So we go in, I go into the room, and I hear a voice from up high in the seats. "Hi, Jeff, how you doing?" Like, what? And it's this woman, Susan Almasi, who had hired both Andrea and me for Lake George Opera. And she was one of the committee people there. And both of us ended up getting hired at the Met too, and did shows with them each year for a few years. One of the experiences that we both had that was kind of neat was we had a show both at City Opera and at the Met on the same day. If either of those theaters offer you work, it's hard to say no. So we said yes, and we figured it out. And as it turned out, it worked out perfectly, because the opera that we were doing at the Met was a Wagner opera. As you know, they go on forever and ever and ever. It started at like 6 and ended at about 11:30 or 12. So we didn't even have to be there until somewhere around 10:30 or 10:45. By then, the show we were doing at City Opera was done. We just got changed around under the tunnels from one theater to the other. Our dressers were ready for us, and we went on and did another show that night. So that's something that it's a unique experience that my wife and I got to share. While I was doing all of that stuff, as I said, I was working in the synagogues. I was up in the choir loft one day at Park Avenue Synagogue, who I had been on and off doing Shabbat services with them and their quartet, and doing concerts with them and telecasts and stuff like that. There was that day there was somebody in the quartet. One of the female singers was not there, and they hired somebody to fill in for her, and person was pretty good, but didn't seem like it was anything that was incredibly outstanding to me at that time. And sort of that was the day that I was sitting there, and for some reason something clicked, and I was sitting there saying to myself, well, and I had found out a little bit about this person, and she was a cantorial student at the seminary, and she had a part-time position at a synagogue, and was, looking forward to this career. And that was, I believe that was the actual day that it sort of clicked for me. And I sat there in the choir loft at Park Avenue Synagogue and said, why don't I do this? It seems right. And like I said, this was almost 18 years later that I finally came to that revelation. And at that time, by that point, Andrea is my wife, had started to not be very observant, but we would at least light the Shabbos candles. We were married at that point, had been married for a few years. And Andrea grew up Reform, and actually was far more observant and knowledgeable than I was, and had thought about being a cantor. So we discussed it, and we decided that this would be a good thing for us to do as a family, because this is too big a thing for me to just decide this is what we're doing with our lives. We had been married for a few years doing the theater, and we had 2 small children in diapers. To sort of change your whole life was kind of a hard decision. But she was behind me 100%. And since we had both had the same career in the theater, commuting together, working together, living together, we realized that it was really not possible for both of us to be cantors and be able to do that too. So Andrea decided at that point that she wanted to stay home with the children and look into the future, look back into singing. I spoke with cantor Erica Lippitz from South Orange, and I spoke with her that one day and asked what would be involved in getting into the seminary to begin my studies. And she told me who I should call. I called Henry Rosenblum, who was the dean at that time at the seminary in the cantorial school. And I believe it was a Monday or a Tuesday, and I said, I explained the whole situation and what I had been through, gone through, and all of that, and what got me there. And I said, when are you going to be having interviews? And he said, well, you've called, just sort of at the last minute, because our interviews are on, I think it was like Wednesday and Thursday that week. Why don't you put it off for, until the spring. This was in the fall. We'll put it off till the spring, and we'll have another round of interviews. And I said to him, no, if it's taken me long enough to make this phone call and decide it was right, I need to do it now. Fax me all of the applications and everything I need to get done, and I'll get it done. And I took care of it all in a day, sent it back to them, went in for my interview, had one Hebrew song that I knew. I could not read Hebrew. I did not know the Aleph Bet. I didn't know anything. But with Eleanor Stieber, I had learned Max Helfman's Shema Kolenu, which I actually sang on the high holidays here. And she actually, in my lesson, when I started to work on that with her years before that, it was written for Jan Pierce, and she wasn't sure how it went, so she picked up the phone while I was in my lesson and spoke to Jan Pierce and said, how do you do this, and how do you phrase this, and all. So my interpretation of it is actually Jan Pierce's interpretation, like where to breathe and how to phrase the things. So I sang that for my audition, and I sang an opera aria from Street Scene by Kurt Weill, and they wanted me to do an interview, go through the other parts of the interview and audition process and see where you were scholastically, academically, what you knew. And I was supposed to go have a Hebrew test, and I said, I'm not even going to bother. I'll tell you right now, I don't know Hebrew. I can't even read the Aleph Bet at all. Rather than say, well, too bad, fortunately for me, their decision was that they said, well, we can let you into the seminary without knowing Hebrew, but we're not letting you out of the seminary without knowing Hebrew. They actually used a quote of mine from the interview in one of their pamphlets a year or two later, when they said, well, would you be willing to live a halachic lifestyle, because you would need to as a cantor? And I totally innocently, I turned to them and I said, I've never heard that word before in my life. Your job is going to be to teach me what that is, and I'll do my best. So that was good enough for them. They accepted that, and that was the beginning of my cantorial studies and into my career. I interviewed over at HUC also, which is the Reform school, not Reform School, but you know what I mean. maybe earlier in my life. No, I'm kidding. The Reform Movement, Hebrew Union College, downtown in New York. And over the years, I had done a whole bunch of concerts with the dean of their school and all the people from there too, so I knew the people over there. And they had sort of wooed me a little bit over the years and said, what could we do to get you to come down here? But when I did actually go down a few days after I got into the seminary, and I went down for an interview with them. And the way that their program was structured, the rabbinic program and the cantorial program being all one school, they were not allowed to fudge it with the Hebrew. So one of the reasons that I ended up staying at JTS, and I'm very glad that I did, was simply because at HUC they said, go study Hebrew for 6 months and then come back and take a test. I said, if I wait 6 months, I'm afraid that I won't come back. Fortunately for me, that is the way that it worked out. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here with you today. We packed up our kids. We had a house in New Jersey, found a renter for the year, moved to Jerusalem, not knowing a syllable of Hebrew, back in the year 2000. We got there, and we actually, to show how little we knew, we got there and it was a Jewish holiday. And we didn't even realize. That's why it was so easy to find a flight that day. So of course, none of the stores were open for us to even get food for a couple of days. No taxis on the streets, no nothing once we got to Jerusalem. Had a couple of different apartments there. I personally don't recommend finding an apartment online all the times. It may work out well, but for us it didn't. If any of you have been to Israel and dealt with Sabras, real Israelis, they're sometimes a little hard to deal with business-wise, so we went to this apartment that we thought would be suitable for the whole family with the little kids, and we needed a crib, and we needed, this, that, and the other thing. And we got there, and it certainly was not someplace that was in any way good for us to be there with the children. The crib that we thought that we would have was actually an old wood playpen that they had lost all the screws and just sort of tied the sides together with rope. And so it was a situation where after we had given our deposits and everything, the Israeli landlord said to us the next day, "You're right, you can't stay here. I'll give you back your money." We found someplace. We stayed in a hotel for a couple of days, and then we found a nice apartment that one of the other students from the previous year had been staying. We actually moved 3 times that year, which was a little tough, but at least they were all within the same neighborhood, the neighborhood of Rehavia. And that was right near the school, which was, I was studying at Machon Schechter, just up the hill near the Israel Museum, and a little beyond that is where the Knesset is. We found a school for the kids, and again, nobody spoke Hebrew at all. We didn't have a car. We had 2 kids, a double stroller, and lots of hills to deal with in Jerusalem. But it worked out well, and we were there for a few months. I went to Ulpan before school started, actually, so I can get some Hebrew. That didn't work as well as I hoped, because since I had the opera background and I was familiar with languages, with some Italian, some French, I was able to talk with people. I figured an immersion program, what better way? Well, I was able to talk to a bunch of people in their own language, so it wasn't as good as I hoped it would be, just because of the way that I did it. We were there for a short while, and a couple of months, and as I said, this was 2000, and the first bomb went off at the Shuk. Sorry. And it was a really scary time. But we decided to stay there through the year. They gave us the option if we wanted to come back to New York and study there. They didn't want anything to happen to the students. but we decided to stay, as did the rest of my classmates, and it was the best thing that I could have done. I got more out of living there during that time than I did out of going to school there. Because unless you've really lived there, you know, we weren't visitors. We weren't staying in a hotel knowing next week we're going home. You know, we were dealing with daily life, going to the store, wondering how you're going to get to school, what bus you could take without worrying about being blown up. And that's something that unless you've lived there during that time, during that type of a situation, you can't understand what it is. And it's amazing what you get used to. You know, the kids we found a preschool in an area called Talpiot, which is near Pardes, was near where Pardes is. And we were lucky enough to find it was an English-speaking Dati Gan preschool, which was run by a woman from Texas. So at least we were able to communicate well enough, and the kids went to a school, and it was good. I got to work with some wonderful teachers, and I got some wonderful experiences there musically as well. Edwin Sarusi was one of my teachers, who is probably the most foremost scholar, is an ethnomusicologist, and he's at the head of the music archives for the university. And I got to go with him to music festivals, you know, Eastern music festivals, where, you know, normally us Western people don't get to experience this type of a thing, where people are just sort of getting together for the whole weekend making music with bazookas and all kinds of weird instruments that we don't usually hear. That's also where I met Stanley Sperber, who is he's a well-known conductor. He's a teacher at Givat Ram in Jerusalem, and they were looking for, again, connecting to my previous life, a ringer for their choir. And I was a tenor, and they heard about me, so they gave me a call. So I went over there. Stanley Sperber, incidentally, is the man who started Zamir Chorale anywhere. There's one in New York, there's one in Boston. He was the one who first came up with the whole idea. If you don't know, Zamir Chorale is a volunteer, semi-pro group, and they're just a wonderful, wonderful choir. So that's how I got my connection over there musically. I was involved I went to my first rehearsal with that group over at the college, and it was I had to deal with a very, very quick learning curve, because the rehearsals were done rak ba'ivrit, completely in Hebrew. When they're telling you where to breathe and how to phrase it and everything, he was just doing it all in Hebrew, so I had to catch on really quickly. And not only that, but most music is written, you know, music is written from left to right, just like English is written from left to right. Well, Hebrew is written from right to left. They've had some experiments with writing music from right to left in Israel, and all the instrumentalists absolutely refused to do it, so all these volumes of music that were written have been shelved and nobody will ever touch them. But the way they write the music there, for their use, is the music goes this way and the Hebrew goes this way, by syllable. So it'll say ba, ruch, ah, ta. So that was kind of interesting to get used to also. But I caught on to that too. I had some great experiences while I was in Jerusalem. We met a lot of great people, learned a lot about the traditions, and as I said, just living there through that time period and having to get up in the morning, and since we didn't speak Hebrew fluently, get on the internet to see what was going on in the news and whether it was an Arab day of rage, whether you were leaving the house or not, or taking the kids to school. We came back to New York at the end of that year. It was a wonderful experience. I got so much out of it. And I was going to classes. We were back at our house in New Jersey. And, you know, sort of after going through that whole year, you know, kind of kissed the ground. We're back here where we're safe. And I was commuting from New Jersey into New York, up on the Upper West Side, well, up at 122nd Street where the seminary is. And one morning I parked my car, and I had figured out the timing of the parking, that I would, my Hebrew class was supposed to start at 9 o'clock, but the parking, you could park over there, over by what's now the Manhattan School of Music. You couldn't park there until 9 o'clock, so the teacher was okay, and I'd go, and I'd get there a couple of minutes, and it was fine. But I was sitting in my car waiting, and I heard some strange noises. And I got into the seminary, and I walked through the doors, and one of the maintenance men came running up and said, "A plane just hit the Trade Center." So that was 9/11, and we all know, how that went. It was really a tough experience for my wife, because all she knew is that I was in New York. Telephone lines were not working, cell phones were barely getting through, and she just didn't know what was going on. And they were closing down the bridges and tunnels quickly, so people weren't going in and out. So she finally did get through to me, and she knew I was okay, and I was able to get back before they closed everything. But that was, after going through the whole year and finally feeling, well, we're back and we're safe, and now, all of a sudden nobody was safe anywhere. Both of those things are definitely life-changing events. On to happier things. I had another 4 years in New York studying at the seminary. While I was doing that, studying all kinds of stuff that you need for the job of cantor, for the position of chazan. I, having done other things in my life, also realized that no matter what job you're doing, what you learn in school is not always necessarily what you need in real life to do the job. Also, the fact is, I had a wife and kids, and I was a full-time student and had given up my job at New York City Opera. At least for that first year, they let me sort of go on leave, but then I had to quit my full-time position there. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was? Oh, so I went and I got a student pulpit. This was out in Paterson, New Jersey. We lived in New Jersey, so it wasn't too far from where I lived. And for 3.5 years, I was student cantor out there while I was studying. I was able to make some money there. I was able to get a lot of important experience there to be able to do my job. Interestingly enough, the rabbi that, the reason I got connected there was because Andrea was still trying to do music jobs here and there, and she was hired for the High Holidays Choir at that synagogue, and they didn't have a full-time cantor. Now the rabbi there was is a very close friend of mine still, Josh Finkelstein, who is the grandson of Louis Finkelstein. If you don't know, he was one of the heads of the conservative movement. There was Solomon Schechter, there was Louis Finkelstein. So that's good, that's yichus. So if I was going to be starting out with anybody, he was a great person to be starting out with. I started doing my services with him from a music book because I couldn't read the Hebrew well enough, and figuring things out. And I remember how great I felt by the second season when I was there, when I actually was able to put away the music book and read the Hebrew and daven from that, at least as best I could remember the music, and started drawing on my experience of all the years in the Orthodox shul, working with this cantor, singing in the choir, and all of that wonderful music. So I had all this music in my head that isn't necessarily written down anywhere, and I was able to use it in the services and recall it and remember the musical motifs, the modes, and things that make the music, that make Jewish music. Little by little, all the things that I had been doing previously were really starting to fall together. I was still doing some shows. Like I said, I had my wife and my kids, and we had bills to pay, and So while I was a student for the next few years, I would do, let's see, Friday night, I'd be going to school all week. Friday night evening, I would go do a service with the quartet in South Orange, and then do a show on Friday night over at Lincoln Center. Saturday morning, I'd get up and I'd go to either that shul, Park East, Park Avenue, or one of the other synagogues in the morning, do a service with them singing in the choir. Then I'd go to Lincoln Center and I would do a matinee and a nighttime show. And then just to mix things up, I would get up on Sunday morning and go do a church job. Because I had, as a musician, as a singer, that's something that you do. You sing in churches. I had been involved in church jobs since about 1980 when I started music school. So it was really kind of bizarre that being a nice Jewish boy, when I got into this, I actually could do a Latin Mass a lot easier than I could do any of this. I had a lot more experience with that. So I would do that, and then I would go and do another show on Sunday afternoon, and then have some rehearsals, and then I got to have a day off and start all over again. So it was not an easy thing getting here, for sure, but absolutely worth it. I'm sure there are a lot of things that I've left out. As I said, I didn't grow up in a very observant home. However, my mother told me that when she was a child, she also didn't grow up in an observant home either, but she remembers that just because she felt like it, she would go down to the corner stiebel and just because she felt like it, and listen to the services. And the women were separate from the men and all, but there was something in her that she wanted to be there. And if I recall correctly, it was, I don't remember, it was Jan Pierce, Richard Tucker, one of the opera singer cantors that were down in that area that she would hear sometimes. I've talked about the music part of this, but that's not what gets you to being a cantor. It's a spiritual thing. And that's what kept me from it for all those years. It has to be within you, it has to feel right, it has to be a spiritual need and belief. And I recall something I see, in a way, music is a religion, in a way, spiritually, that kind of transcends denominations and other religions. It's a common thing that we all have together. So whether it be church music in Latin or Hebrew or whichever it is, the spirituality is what is behind the music. Otherwise, there's no reason to have the music. I think one of my main reasons to be a cantor congregationally is that, let's face the facts and be honest, not everybody's fluent in Hebrew. Not everybody understands every syllable of what's in the Siddur, in the Machzor. Well, again, there's my connection back to opera. You don't go to the opera and understand all of the Italian, French, German, whatever it is either. And in that case, it's the performer's job to interpret the text through the music, so that whether you understand the actual word for word is not as important as whether you understand the meaning, spiritually, how it makes you feel. And that is, I think, one of the primary reasons that a chazan existing as a position should be there as an interpreter of the music for people spiritually, to be able to make the connection and not have to, and even if you do know the Hebrew, to not have to think about it all the time and be able to just be absorbed in the music and let it take you there. I recall back when I was a student at SUNY Purchase, when my step-grandfather, who was an atheist, you know, he really didn't believe, actually I always get them to be atheist and agnostic. He didn't believe in God at all, right? So that's atheist, right? Okay. He didn't believe in God from what he told me, but I think he really did. Because I remember it was my junior recital at Purchase, and I had done a whole bunch of song literature, you know, some Beethoven music, Schubert, some opera, some duets, all different kinds of stuff, Mozart songs. And afterwards he came over to me and said, Jeff, I saw your soul. Because that's, like I said, the music is a very spiritual thing. I see a hand. Is there a question?
Yeah. You mentioned your approach to Hebrew school. How can you make it different for our students here to not feel like you did?
Okay, if you didn't hear, the question is, how can I make it different here for the kids not to feel like it's a terrible thing to go to Hebrew school and they don't want to deal with it. Hebrew school and bar mitzvah training, I'm dealing with directly with bar mitzvah training, and indirectly I'm actually working with the school we're talking of how we can develop the programming for the kids to be learning the prayers at different levels, you know, at different grades, so it makes sense leading toward bar mitzvah. I can tell you for the bar mitzvah training, not having somebody yell at you and just make a tape for you and not care if you understand why you're doing it, and just telling you, just shut up and go learn this. He didn't say shut up to me, but you know, making it more than just a requirement and you have to go do this and don't ask why is I found a very good tool in itself. Not treating the students as, well, I'm the cantor and you just have to listen to me. I like to get to know the kids. I like to get to have a relationship with them. I also like tech toys. So that's another thing. I like computer programs. I have a computer program that I use with the bar mitzvah students. They're not required to, but I show it to them. I use it myself, and it's a totally interactive computer program that's really cool. It becomes sort of you know, more interesting to them. It's almost a game sometimes with color coding, and you make it faster and slower, and you can customize it and add instruments and do all kinds of weird stuff to it. I like to, like I said, be with the children, not, you know, interacting with the children and not at the children, through the music, through the choirs. I didn't grow up with the choirs, but I found it a wonderful tool to get kids involved and feel that there's a connection both community-wise and whether they realize it or not. They're learning some of the service, they're learning some Hebrew, they're getting some understanding, and they're getting involved in the community, in the Jewish community. Yes? How did I get to Sarasota? On a plane. No, actually I drove. The way I ended up in Sarasota is my wife and I, 20 years ago, I may have bypassed this. My wife and I, 20 years ago, were part of the Sarasota Opera. We were apprentices with the Sarasota Opera. And then I continued on to Erie, Pennsylvania, and all over, and did different opera stuff. But that was our connection. Erie, there you go. Over at Gannon University. With Bruce, I forget his last name, Mick something or other. Anyway, you know who I mean. Bruce Wright, you're right, that's it, Bruce Wright. I left Sarasota directly and I did Cenerentola with them, Rossini's Cinderella. But that's my connection with Sarasota. I had been when I graduated the seminary, I was fortunate enough to go into a wonderful pulpit in Washington, D.C. at a very large congregation. It was about 1,600 families. The main sanctuary had permanent seats for 1,500, whereas the rabbi, when I started there, the rabbis, when people would say, how big is the sanctuary, he said, it sleeps 1,500. So anyway, the way I ended up down here is I saw that the timing was right. I decided it was time to move on from my last pulpit. This was listed as a synagogue that was potentially looking for a new chazan, and I jumped on it. Another question. Yes, Stephen, you had it.
Yeah, when you say your uncle said there was no God, how do you handle that? He said with no God.
Well, he didn't say there is no God. There's a difference between him saying there is no God and him not believing that there is a God. So if somebody wants to believe that, I don't have to impose my beliefs on another person. I could share how I feel and let them, make their own decision.
Right, because I grew up in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
When my mom was maybe 2 or married, my dad was just physical and had relationship that being single was a Jewish, married German, over Europe, and so forth. And my question was with God. Now when we came to speak for that, use him, the one that was crucified, because he proclaimed he was God. But it's just like I had a hard time with that myself.
But this conversation could go on for hours and hours, so I'm happy to talk about it with you, outside of this venue, okay? Yes?
It's my fault.
I'm sorry, behind you.
It occurs to me that you and I may have known each other many years ago at a
Park
time when
Avenue.
you look different and I look different. Because I sang with the Rottenberg Chorale too. And we used to get a ringer, and I think you may have been the ringer.
That was me.
That was one of the choruses of which I sang.
And you were involved at Park Avenue Synagogue too,
And
right?
then I was the president of the chorus at Park Avenue Synagogue, a chorus of 75 voices.
Yes, this is at Rottenberg Chorale was with Elaine Grossman.
And then Rottenberg went in either before or after that, I don't remember.
And then it changed names also to the Hebrew.
Yes, it changed its name. It had been the Hebrew Art School Chorale.
Right,
and then there was a wonderful donor, so it became the Rottenberg Chorale. I wanted to know what are the requirements now at the cantorial school of JTS for cantors, because there is the idea that you have to know 2 musical instruments and various other things. Could you tell us a little about that?
That's a good question. It's sort of in flux right now. When my class was there, we started to be pretty vocal about saying, there are things I think that need to change. Having been out in a pulpit, I saw, even though it was a pretty traditional pulpit, I saw that there was more of a need than just for the traditional old settings of the music and the nusach, and there was more that needed to be addressed. And I know that right now they're revamping the program. One of the things is musical requirements are a little bit rougher, or they're not rougher, but they're requiring more to start out with. When you come in, there are, I can't really say a lot. I'm actually in contact fairly frequently with Nancy Abramson, who is now the acting head of the cantorial program. So the newest thing that, as you said just a couple of weeks ago, that was one of the new things, was that they are asking that you know 2 instruments, not just 1. And one of the other things that they've done with the programs that I voiced a lot of times was they're bringing the rabbis and the cantors together more often. When I started out, the way the program was was the rabbinic students would go to Israel in their third year, and the cantorial students would go in their first year. Well, and then you didn't have very many classes together otherwise. Well, that seems like, you know, a recipe for disaster, because you're going to have all the rabbis who have been in school for 3 years thinking that the cantors don't know what they're doing because, you know, in their experience, well, yeah, they're 3 years behind them in school as far as all this learning. So they've changed that, and now the rabbis and cantors are both going to be going to Israel in their second year of school. So that, I think, is a wonderful change. Yes?
You mentioned that you sang Wagner. How do you feel about that now and then? And also, as an ancillary question, when you sang in the church and you had to sing about, I assume, about Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Very good question. And you're right, both of them were similar ideas. Again, I in the church situation, it was a job. I looked at it as the expression of the music. I secretly, when, you know, singing in the choir, sometimes when I would be called upon to say, to use Jesus' name as whatever, I would kind of fade out a little bit, kind of blend the sounds a little so it would work a little bit more better for me. But I looked at it as, when I started out with it, it wasn't really a big theological problem for me because I wasn't really thinking in those terms. I was thinking musically, and it was the music and the spirit of the music, whether it was using one name or another name. As far as the Wagner, again, it's the music. I personally, I'm not a huge lover of Wagner, because it's very long, but there is some beautiful music. I try to separate politics from other things. So that's a way that I was able to do things like the Wagner. Interestingly enough, one of the times that my wife and I were both doing a Wagner opera is the Met had, I don't know what they were thinking, but they scheduled a Wagner opera on Yom Kippur. My wife and I were singing in the quartet in Fort Lee with Paul Zim as the cantor. It was his first year. That's Saul Zim's brother. And it was his first year he had gone from Brooklyn up to Fort Lee, New Jersey. And what we had to do that night is we had to break our fast in the car driving into New York to do a Wagner opera. That was kind of a surreal thing. That's, I think, the only time that it really was like, well, you know, I don't know about this. But it's more of a, like I said, spiritually, that's how I dealt with it. You take the names out, and I try to take the politics out and just deal with pure music. Yes?
In terms of the teaching, I might be able to pick up the Siddur and recite the sounds of the letters of Hebrew, but I have not a faint idea of what I'm reading. In Israel, Hebrew is a living language today.
Mm-hmm.
How's your feeling about it? Is it best to teach it, to recite it, to make the chanting sound right? Best to teach it as understand what you're actually praying?
Oh, well, it's got to be both.
Yeah.
It absolutely. This is one of the things that is problematic is while we, and that's also one of the reasons that it was a problem when I was learning it is, they said, shut up and study it and memorize it. But it didn't mean anything. So while it's important to learn how it goes so you can physically participate in the service, and the kids have to learn how to do this, if they're not told what it means along the way, well, then there's no real connection. So in my teaching, I try to make sure that I give them both. Anybody else have any questions? Yes?
Very short comment, but I speak elementary Hebrew. Ifnei Arba Shanim. I went to a Hebrew class here at the synagogue, Ifnei Arba Shanim. Sitting next to me was a gorgeous-looking young blonde studying the Aleph Bet. That was who you succeeded. Diane.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I've been very fortunate in getting to spend a lot of time with Hazan Nathanson, and we've gotten to be good friends. I feel very fortunate in getting to benefit from her experience, and especially, you know, I came from one extreme. She came from a heck of a further extreme than I did. Yeah, I respect her tremendously. Yes.
Do you foresee a choir here?
We've actually started.
Oh, good.
We have a youth choir and an adult choir. It started last week. We're meeting on Sunday morning. The adult choir is meeting from 10 to 11 here in the chapel on Sunday morning, and the youth choir is from 12:45 to 1:30 after religious school. We didn't meet this week because we had mitzvah day, so you know that trumped the choir rehearsal. But in our first meeting, we ended up with we have about a dozen people, all 4 voice parts covered. A lot of people that can read music and are very musical. And if you can't read music and you want to be involved in it, it's open to everybody. And I look forward to be able to doing a lot of good music, both to be involved in services, concerts. I'd love to be able to go out and put some music together to go out into the community and do some singing in over, say, at Kobernik or different places that could really, you know, would really enjoy it. Okay, if anybody else has any more questions, you know where to find me. I'm here every day except for Monday usually. And I thank you very much for this opportunity. Thanks.
Very enjoyable. We're from Villanova.